Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Political hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Welcome to the program. You could join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com, where the conversation is always great, and you are always welcome to join me on the air. You could call in. Numbers to call, 301-768-4841. In North America and Israel, the number is 0265000151. Of course, you didn't write those numbers down, so you could get them right there on the top of the page at israelnewstalkradio.com. Last summer, we spoke a lot, nearly every single week, about Jews being beaten up in the streets of New York City. We talked about the attacks on Jews in broad daylight. We talked about the attacks on Jews in the middle of the night. We talked about the damage to Jewish buildings. We talked about the expense that Jews had to go through to fortify their existence in New York, to save themselves and to secure their safety. And we talked about the inaction of the New York administration, the New York government, in protecting the Jews of New York City. And we spoke almost all summer, last summer, about that. Well, it is summertime again, or just about summertime again. And here we go again. Jews in New York City, Jews in Canada, Jews in Germany, Jews in other parts of Europe have been beaten up, have been attacked. Jewish buildings have been fortified yet again, right across North America and Europe, because of the threat of being attacked. Not attacked because they did anything, not attacked because there was a reason to attack them, but attacked because they are Jews. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more right here on Political Hitman. I invite you to join me in the chat room and join in on the conversation. I always want to hear from you, and I think it's important that we have this discussion. So join me in the chat room on israelnewstalkradio.com. Join me on the phone at 301-768-4841. In Israel, it's 0265000151. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on israelnewstalkradio.com.
Political hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. You could join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com, where the conversation has already started and is quite fascinating. And of course, you could call in. It is a call-in show, which means that you're more than welcome to join me on the air. To call in to North America, the number is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could find those numbers on the top of the page at israelnewstalkradio.com. And of course, you could find them in the chat room on israelnewstalkradio.com. So Jews are being beaten up right across the world. And there's no real movement to stop this. The leftists, which are pretty much running the world these days, have endorsed this beating up of Jews because, in their opinion, all Jews support Israel, and Israel defending itself from Gazan missiles is apparently a cardinal sin in Lefty land. And it is such a sin that all Jews around the world deserve to be beaten up, deserve to be hurt, because Israel's defending itself. Now, we can look at the morality of this whole thing. We could go back and take a look at the moral values of this whole thing, and understand that there is evil and there is good, and the evil is Hamas. Morally, if you take a look at it on a moral level, if you take a look on a political level, if you take a look on any level, Hamas is evil. They are indiscriminately throwing rockets into Israeli civilian populations, trying to kill men, women, and children, trying to destroy the state of Israel, trying to kill the country, wreck it, blow it up. And that is evil in itself. Regardless of political affiliations, regardless of what your political point of view is, if you are a moral person, there is no way that you could possibly say that the actions of Hamas in the last week, in the last year, in the last 15, 16 years, has any inkling of morality to it. Using people as human shields, using children as human shields, is completely immoral, and not only is it immoral, it is a war crime. And it should be charged as a war crime. The leaders of Hamas should be arrested. The leaders of the Palestinian Authority should be arrested, since they merged just a few years ago and they became one unified government. So the leaders of this government should be arrested and tried for war crimes, and not war crimes against the Israelis, even though there's plenty of those. They should be tried for war crimes against the Arabs living in Gaza. The way they treat their population, the way they treat their children, their women, their children, the innocent people of Gaza, is absolutely horrific. And they should be punished for that. And then, after they're punished for the way they treat their own people, they should be punished for lobbing missiles into the heart of Jewish civilian populations in Israel. Trying to annihilate the Jewish people, which is, by the way, number one on their charter, number one on their list of to-do things around the world, kill Jews wherever you see them. So, advocating for the genocide of Jews is a war crime in itself. Committing the crime against your own population is inexcusable. There are Jews in North America who are last week or so taking off any sign of their Judaism. They're removing every sign of their Judaism. They're taking their mezuzot, the scrolls they have on their front doors, off their doors. They're removing their yarmulkes, their kippas, their skull caps. They're taking them off. They're taking off their Star of Davids that they hang around their neck. They're removing all semblance of Judaism. They're hiding it. Now, years ago, maybe 15 years ago, the chief rabbi of France advised the Jews of France that because of the Islamic rise in France, in Paris, that the Jews of Paris should take off all of their Jewish symbols and should walk around with baseball caps instead of kippas. They should walk around and hide the fact that they're Jewish for their own safety. It's our obligation to protect lives, and this was their way of protecting life. Take off everything identifiably as Jewish because Islamists were attacking Jews in the street. And the rest of the world just kind of poo-pooed it. They said, oh, okay, so it's happening in France. Who cares? And I remember here on this show, we were screaming. We were saying, hey, we can't ignore this. I've been screaming about this since I started this show. I've been screaming about this on my other shows. I've been screaming at this for over or almost 30 years. We can't ignore the rise of Islamists. We can't ignore the virulent anti-Jewish attitude of the people of North America and the people of Europe. Look, Jews were never welcome anywhere. Jews are always the oppressed people. Jews are always the scapegoats, and Jews are always the first ones attacked when anything happens around the world. And Jewish life means nothing to anyone except for the Jews. Let's be honest, this last week proved that, didn't it? All the politicians who lined up against Israel, all the celebrities, all the media that lined up against Israel, yelling at Israel and screaming at Israel, they're committing a war crime. All those people lined up to condemn Israel for defending themselves. But not a word, not even a word, about the missiles being launched into Israeli civilian populations. Nobody cares about that. The Jews that died after they were hit by Hamas missiles, nobody cares about that. I care about that. You should care about that. And anybody with any semblance of morality should care about that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The world has slipped into a moral sewer. Morality has disappeared in average everyday conduct, in average everyday discussion, in average everyday attitudes. Morality doesn't exist anymore. When they destroyed the family values, when they destroyed the family structure, when they said that men aren't men and women aren't women, and that a woman could be better than a man or could be the same as a man, and that men and women are not needed to raise children, when they destroyed family values, and believe me, men and women are both needed to raise children. Women are just as important as men are, and they have a different role to play than men do. There is a different role. That's why women are built differently physically. That's why they were created differently. Women and men have a role to produce and to create in this world and to follow. They have a mission to follow. But once we destroyed that family structure, once we got rid of fathers and made fathers stupid, and once we got rid of said it's okay to have two mothers and one father and no father, and once we did that, and once we started saying that God and religion are dirty words, and words that we shouldn't be talking about anymore, and words that we should just be ignoring, and religion doesn't mean anything. Once we did that, we set up the world with no moral compass. The moral compass has disappeared. And once that moral compass disappeared, then it's easy. It's easy for people, famous people, media, to get up and say, oh, look, Israel is defending itself. They're launching missiles into targets, to military targets in Gaza. War crime. It's easy for them to say, oh, look, they killed a bunch of little Palestinian children. War crime. Because Jewish life and Jewish values and Jewish blood never really mattered to anybody. We saw it during the Intifadas. We saw it during all the attacks on Jews over the last 65 years, the last 70 years. We've seen it. We shouldn't be surprised by it. It's not a surprise. It's not something that we should say, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. We saw it coming from a mile away. The problem is, and it's a major problem, is that young Jews whose connection to Judaism, connection to Zionism, connection to the state of Israel is a little weaker than, let's say, us older Jews. They're believing the propaganda. They're believing CNN. They're believing MSNBC. They're believing John Oliver. They're believing it all. They're watching it on television in short little bumps, because that's the attention span they have, in 2-minute clips. And they're believing everything they hear and everything they see, all the manipulated media, all the spin. They're believing it all. And the side that's trying to tell the truth, the side that is trying to give it out and to deliver it the way it should be delivered, the way it has to be delivered, to frame it in the way of reality, that side is being ignored. It's not being publicized. It's not out there. That's the problem. So Jews go out in good faith in New York, in Toronto, in Montreal, in Chicago. They go out in good faith, carrying Israeli flags, and they get attacked by violent Arab mobs. But instead of condemnations of the violence, instead of the media condemning the violence and the discussions on how to stop violence in middle of town when you have peaceful demonstrators and suddenly people come and beat them up, instead of discussing that, The discussion is centered around, why are the Jews out there with Israeli flags? The whole world is backwards. It's crazy. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. Give me a call in North America. The number is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You can join me in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where you'll also find the numbers to call in. Love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Siminto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Siminto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the conversation by going to the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation's always great and always happening, and it's happening right now as we speak on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You can feel free to call in, too. Numbers to call in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. You could, of course, find those numbers on the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. So, Jews are being beaten up. And Jewish institutions, Jewish buildings are being threatened. Last week, we celebrated Shavuot, the holiday of the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. And Jews walking to synagogue on Shavuot were threatened by cars, by people in cars. The cars didn't threaten, the people did. But they were being threatened by people in cars that were following them, flying the flag of the occupying Gazans, and yelling death threats to them. Jews were being beaten up in New York City. There is a video circulating. I'm sure most of you have seen this already. If you haven't, you should check it out. Of a group of Jews that were just entering or leaving a synagogue. It's unclear if they're just coming or going. And cars pulling up, 2 or 3 cars pulling up, flying these flags, and the people jumping out of the cars and beating up the Jews. And there were police there, and the police jumped in, and they were beating up the police too. I am sure that you could understand how concerned some Jews are in North America. Now there is a solution to the problem. Now we've talked about the solution before, and we were talking about it in New York, and we talked about it when Jews of France were being beaten up and shot, because this situation only gets worse. It doesn't get better. See, the problem with Islamists is, unlike white supremacists and some of the other people who attack Jews on an occasional basis, the problem with Islamists is that they don't give up. That they once they start attacking Jews in a certain neighborhood or in a certain land, they continue to attack Jews in that neighborhood and in that land. They never give up. They never give up because they believe that they are supreme, and this they're right, and this is their right to do, and they're doing their good deed of the day by beating up a Jew, and by taking care of an infidel. So they don't give up. So once they decide that this is what's going to happen, and this is what's religiously right for us to do, because remember, this is not a political war, this is not a land war, this has nothing to do with politics or land. This has to do with religion, and we have to keep that in mind. You see, a lot of people forget that, and they forget it because the media itself doesn't frame it as a religious war. The Israeli occupiers, they're occupying Palestinian land. This is what the media says. And it's not true. The media is lying to you, and they've been lying to you for years. For as long as Israel's existed, the media has been lying to you. And since 1967, they've doubled their lie. The media has been lying to you, and they are lying to you today, and they'll be lying to you tomorrow. The media created a narrative That is a big lie. So what is the lie? Let's take a look at it. There's no reason not to look at it. Let's take a look at the lie. And the underlying lie is that the Israelis are occupying somebody else's land. That is the first lie. The first lie that they're trying to sell you, that the Israelis have somehow occupied other people's land. And the second lie is that if the Israelis just gave up the land, there would be peace in the region, that Israel's settlements and Israeli actions and the actions of the Israeli government is causing this war to continue for so many years. These are the two lies that the media continuously sells you, and they are lies all the way. So how are they lies? First of all, let's take a look at the first lie, that Israel is occupying other people's lands. It's not true. If you take a look at international law, everyone's always yelling international law. Everyone becomes an international lawyer somehow. But if you take a look at international law, we have to go back to the 1920s to a conference called the San Remo Conference. Now, if you've never heard of the San Remo Conference, and chances are you've never heard it, because Israeli groups that defend Israel are too busy trying to defend the existence of the State of Israel and the legitimacy of the State of Israel, and never actually discuss the fact that Israel is legal, and there's no reason to discuss the legitimacy of the State of Israel. And the only reason I'm talking about the legitimacy of the State of Israel right now is because Jewish activists don't talk about it. They talk about it in generic terms. Well, Israel won defensive wars. No, it has nothing to do with that. That doesn't legitimize the country. Fine, they won defensive wars. They took land in defensive wars, therefore the land's there. No, I don't want to hear that anymore. That's not relevant at all. In fact, if you really want to get technical, and we could get really technical here, the San Reno Conference gave Jews, a Jewish homeland in the Middle East, which encompassed the entire mandate of Palestine. The mandate of Palestine, the entire mandate, which included Transjordan, which included parts of Syria, which included Judea, Samaria, and the rest of Israel. That entire region was given to the Jewish people. Now, the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the United Nations, they gave the British the mandate of Palestine. And what was their mandate? You see, everyone talks about the mandate of Palestine, but nobody ever explains the fact that a mandate has a reason. That's why it's called a mandate. They have a reason. They have a reason to do something. They're given the land for a purpose, the mandate. Everybody always says the mandate of Palestine. Nobody ever talks about what the mandate was. And the mandate was quite clear. The British government was given the mandate to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, in the region of Palestine that was defined by the League of Nations, which included Transjordan and included parts of Syria and included all of Israel. Period. That was their mandate. The British didn't do their job. They owed too many people too much stuff from World War I and World War II. They owed too many Arabs too many things, especially the Hashemites. They owed them a lot of stuff. So they gave the Hashemites, they gave a Hashemite king Jordan, they gave a Hashemite king Syria, because they had to. They had to pay them back for the help that they gave them in World War I. If you want more information on that, look up Lawrence of Arabia. So the help they gave them in World War I and the help that they gave them in World War II, and the fact that the British didn't really like the Jews all that much anyway, so they gave away most of the land. So if we're taking a look at law and legal existence of the State of Israel, international law is there. Israel is legitimate. In fact, Israeli land that should be Israel, is now being occupied by a country called Jordan. Parts of land is being occupied by Syria. So let's be honest. So you want to be honest, let's be honest. The United Nations adopted all the resolutions of the League of Nations when they created the United Nations after World War II. And by adopting all the resolutions of the League of Nations, they also adopted the resolution that recognized the mandate of Palestine as a Jewish homeland. All right, so lie number one. That was lie number one. Now, lie number two, that the media is trying to sell you. So the first lie is that there is a home that the Jews are living in the Israelis have taken over land that's not theirs, and they're occupying land. That's actually the other way around. Arabs are occupying Jewish land. Lie number 2 is that Israel's committing war crimes and oppressing and creating a concentration camp in Gaza. This is lie number 2 that the media is selling you. Now let's look at lie number 2, because it's important to understand that the media is selling you a crock, a big bag of nothing. Lie number 2 is that Israel's committing war crimes against the Palestinians living in Gaza. This is what they tell us. If you take a look at the land of Gaza, you take a look at the history of Israel and Gaza, you will know, and if you look and you're honest about looking at the history, you will understand that there was an Israeli presence in Gaza until 2006, from 1967 to 2006. And in 2006, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon made a hard decision. And he made this decision based on numerous factors, but he made a very difficult decision. And his decision was that Israel would abandon Gaza. They would leave Gaza. They would take out every man, woman, child. They would unbury every body. They would take everything that even resembled Jews and take it out of Gaza. They would remove it from Gaza and make Gaza a Jew-free. You see, it's really strange, and I find it extremely, extremely strange that Israel's being called an apartheid state, but the only way the Arabs want to have peace with Israel, and it's all fake anyway, but the only way they're insisting on having peace with Israel is that no Jews live on their land. But that's not apartheid, apparently. Only Jews could commit apartheid. So, the lie is that the Arabs want peace, that it's a land war. It's not a land war. We'll get to that when we come back from the break. Because it's obviously a religious war. It can't be a land war. I'll explain to you why. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. Feel free to call in 301-768-4841 in North America and Israel 0265-00151. You could join me in the chat room where the conversation is always great on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And of course, you can find the numbers to call in on the website too. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello, I am Walter Bingham. If you want to hear the news behind the news and the true perspective on world affairs, then the Walter Bingham File is the program for you. We bring you interviews with the movers and shakers, political commentaries, and on-the-spot reports of events as they happen. All here every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Israel time, 9 a.m. Eastern time. And it's all archived on our website. Make it a date.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation is always happening and it gets kind of interesting. So the conversation in the chat room is really interesting. I've been monitoring it the whole show. It gets really, really interesting. So join me in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You can also call in. It is a call-in show. I'd love to hear from you. Numbers are 301-768-4841. And in Israel, you could dial 0265-00151. So we're talking about the media lies, the lies that they're feeding you The lies that some young Jews are believing that Israel's committing some kind of war crime against the Arabs living in Gaza. So let's talk about that for a second. So in 2006, Ariel Sharon, then Prime Minister of the State of Israel, decided unilaterally, he didn't discuss it with anybody, he just decided that he was going to pull out every man, woman, child, every dead body, every dog, chicken, giraffe that lived in Gaza. And Gaza was going to become Jew-free, an apartheid zone for the Arabs. And so he would do that. And he would grant the Arabs that claimed to be Palestinians, he would grant them the right to, go and create a Palestinian state in Gaza. Create a Palestinian state in Gaza. That was their right. They could have done that. They could have gone and they could have created a beautiful state. They could have used the infrastructure that was left there, the greenhouses and the factories that were left there, to build industry. They could have created a state that lived in peace and harmony with Israel and traded with Israel, and the people of Gaza could have lived nicely. But instead, the Palestinian Authority went to elections. And the people of Judea, Samaria, the Arabs of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza decided to elect Hamas. A civil war broke out, and not long after Israel abandoned Gaza, did bombs start flying from Gaza to the southern part of Israel. So much for peace and land for peace. But it goes farther than that. The idea of land for peace as a failure goes even farther than that. So there's proof on the ground that giving land does not achieve peace. 100% not. But it goes farther than that. You could join me in the chat room, by the way, on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Just click on the button that says chat room. You could join me in the chat room. You could call in. Numbers are at the top of the page on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. It goes further than that, though. So there were a lot of different negotiations. There were a lot of different times that Israeli leaders lost their dignity and went to meet with Arab leaders, these terrorists that have been running the Palestinian Authority and the terrorists that have been running Gaza. They went to meet with these people to try to negotiate a peace. And they always argued the same thing. You don't negotiate peace with friends. You only negotiate peace with enemies. And therefore, we are meeting with our enemies in order to negotiate peace. I mean, I remember Yitzhak Shamir told me that when he went to Madrid. And after that, I've heard that numerous times from different Israeli politicians that that you don't negotiate with the enemies, you don't negotiate with friends, you negotiate with enemies. And sometimes the enemies you have to negotiate with have blood on their hands, but you got to do it because you got to do it. Because peace trumps everything. And I agree, peace does trump everything. And if there was any chance of peace, I would be so in favor of meeting with the terrorists and saying, okay, so let's have peace. Let's have a permanent peace. Let's live in harmony together. You could grow flowers. I'll grow pineapples, and we'll trade. I'd be more than happy for that to happen, but that's not what happens. Each time Israel offered land, lots and lots of land, including Jerusalem in a couple of the deals, each time they offered this land, they offered it on condition that the Arabs on the other side, receiving the land, will recognize Israel as a Jewish state. In some of the offers, in some of the land offers, this was the only condition. There were no other conditions. The only condition was that they would recognize Israel as a Jewish state and they would live in peace next to Israel. That was the condition. And each time, the Arab leaders walked away from the table. Because this is a religious war, not a land war. If it was a land war, it would have been solved a long, long time ago. It hasn't been solved because it's a religious war. It's a religious war that has been going on for centuries. where the Muslims feel that the Jews should not exist, the Jews are infidels because they don't accept Muhammad, where the Muslims believe that any land that has been occupied by a Muslim caliphate must remain Muslim forever, and any government that runs the land is an infidel government. It is a war, a religious war, because when things happen in Gaza and things happen in Israel, Jews around the world suffer the consequences. So Gaza launches missiles into Israel a couple of weeks ago. They start launching missiles. Israel retaliates by launching missiles at Gazan missile launchers in Gaza. And Jews in New York, Jews in Toronto, Jews in Montreal get beaten up. There is no other reason, there is absolutely no reason for Jews to be attacked anywhere in the world. No reason at all. If this was a land war or a political war. There was no reason at all for Jews to be attacked anywhere else outside of the land of Israel if this was a skirmish between Israel and Gaza. But it's not seen as that. It's not seen as that by the people who are involved. Jews around the world have an affinity to Israel. It is our homeland. It is our ancestral land. It is our indigenous land. We are the indigenous people of Israel. So we have a connection to Israel, a connection that far exceeds the bond that we have to any other country. And the Muslims have an affinity to kill Jews. Now, I'm not saying all Muslims want to kill Jews, but the radical Muslims who identify with Hamas, who identify with the Palestinian Authority, they have this penchant for killing Jews. And when Hamas's mission is to kill Jews wherever you may see them, it's not only in Israel, wherever you may see them around the world, wherever you see them, you have to kill a Jew. When that's in their charter, and it is, then you know that this is not a land war. This is not a war that you're fighting to maintain land or to get 5 more feet of land or 10 more feet of land. This is a war over the dominance of one religion over the other. And not Judaism over Islam, because Jews don't really care if the Islamics live around them. Just let us live in peace. We don't really care about you. This is a war to destroy the Jewish independence. This is a war to destroy the Jewish, to destroy Jewish independence and destroy a Jewish state, the only Jewish state in the world. It's a war to destroy the state. And anyone who argues differently is living in some kind of weird world. Is living in some kind of world that doesn't exist. And the media, I don't know what world the media is living in. It's definitely not the world of reality. But if you really want to discuss this and you really want to argue the fact and you really want to get into a fight on social media or in person with somebody, you want to get into a fight of words, there's no argument. It's a no starter. And it's always been a no starter for me in debates and anyway, where when they say that Israel's an illegitimate state. The second they say that, there's nothing left to argue. Because it's contrary to reality. It's contrary to the history. It's contrary to international law. It's contrary to everything. So if the argument starts with Israel's illegitimate, there's nothing left to talk about. But if anyone wants to actually have a good, honest dialogue, I'm open to do it. I'm open to talk to you. And I'll bring you here on the show. We could talk together. You just have to just contact me. My email address is on Israel News Talk Radio's website. You can find me there. Send me an email, and let's figure it out. Let's do it. Because only honest dialogue. I mean, we can only learn from honest dialogue, and there's not that much of it happening anywhere. So honest dialogue is what I'm looking for, and I'd love to talk to anybody. Now, I may not be 100% right in everything I say, and usually I'm not. But I know I have a moral compass. My moral compass is pretty good. And when I look at an attack on a country, an attack on innocent civilians, innocent men, women, and children, I look at bombs falling on their heads of innocent people indiscriminately launched into civilian populations. My morality stands with the people who have to defend themselves. In any way they have to defend themselves. If you don't want bombs to land in Gaza, you don't want Hamas to be destroyed in Gaza, tell Hamas to stop launching bombs into Israel. They don't launch bombs into Israel, they'll live in peace forever. The answer is simple, the solution is easy. Just wish more people would see it. Well, they see it. I wish they would say it. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you for joining me. I will see you again next week.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.